The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the August National Farm to School topical webinar. We're going to give everyone a few moments to jump on the line, and then we'll get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining the webinar. We'll give everyone a few minutes to jump on the line, and then we'll get started momentarily. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the National Farm to School Network webinar. We'll get started in just a moment. Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar. We'll get started in just a moment here. Thanks for your patience. Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining the webinar. This is the August National Farm to School Network topical trending topics webinar. Today we're talking about farm to early care and education, specifically Indigenous foods in the early care and education setting. We really appreciate you joining us and apologize for that momentary delay, but we're ready to roll now. Just a few housekeeping reminders as we get started. This webinar will be recorded and archived for future viewing in the National Farm to School Network resource database. And you'll also receive a link to access the recording in the follow-up email, as well as links to resources and reports shared from our speakers today. So keep an eye out for that email. Also, all of our attendees are in listen-only mode. Please enter any questions you might have in the chat box in your control panel, and we'll have a good amount of time for some question and answer session with all of our panelists at the very end. So please feel free to enter your questions throughout the webinar today. My name's Lacey Stevens, and I'm the program manager with the National Farm to School Network. I'll be your host and moderator for today's webinar. Next slide, please. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time today, the National Farm to School Network welcomes you. We're an information, advocacy, and networking hub for communities working to bring local food sourcing, school gardens, and food and agriculture education into schools and early care and education settings across the U.S. NFN's network model includes core and supporting partner organizations in all 50 states, Washington, D.C., and the U.S. territories, as well as over 20,000 farm to school supporters. Those are our network members members, and of course our National Advisory Board and staff. Next slide, please. We do hold these trending topics webinar on a monthly basis and would like to invite you to join us for our next webinar focusing on farm to school policy, specifically state farm to school month proclamations. So we'll be hearing from some of our partners in states across the country how those state farm to school month proclamations came to be in their states. That's Thursday, September 6th, and you'll also receive that link to register in that follow-up email as well. Next slide, please. So moving into our topic of the day, a really exciting topic, and we've got an incredible panelist of speakers with a lot of insight and information to share. Talking about Indigenous foods in early care and education settings. We know incorporating Indigenous foods into education and meals in early care and education settings offers a lot of different types and varieties of benefits, increasing children's knowledge of tribal history and foodways, and strengthening cultural, spiritual, and social connections in the community. But there are also challenges, and we'll hear from a number of speakers today about innovative approaches and resources for overcoming those challenges. We'll start with Elena Paisano from the National Farm to School Network, who will give us some background on NFSN's work in Native communities and also share challenges, opportunities, and resources around integrating Indigenous foods in childcare food programs. Then we'll hear about some specific initiatives in ECE settings from both Minnesota and Alaska, and about the approaches and resources that have supported success in these communities. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Elena to get us started. Next slide, please. Elena, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lacey. Goatsi Hanu. Good morning, everybody. My name is Elena Paisano. I'm Water Clan from Laguna Pueblo, Czechoslovakian, born for the San Carlos Apache and the Dene. I'm based out of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I serve as the National Farm to School Network's program manager, working with farm to school in Native communities specifically. So I'm just going to share with you a little bit about our history of working with groups on the ground and some of the challenges that we learned, as well as some really great approaches that we think are pretty innovative, including the partners that we're working with right now through our Sea Change in Native Communities cohort. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think I'm probably preaching to the audience a little bit here, but I'm just going to start with the big picture. So, you know, for me and for those that I work with, farm to school is really an issue of food sovereignty. You know, farm to school really employs us to look at growing our own food, specifically working with our youth and our teachers and our communities to do so. So this is not a new concept for us, right? Our communities, Native communities, have been sustainable in our production for all time, and we have lived in harmony with the land while sustaining life for our communities. And there, you know, times have changed a little bit, but we're still doing this in different ways, and that's what's really beautiful about farm to school as a strategy. So that sort of knowledge, the Indigenous knowledge of the land and how we educate ourselves on how to work with the land, that's an example of food sovereignty. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so as I was just mentioning, farm to school, it's not a new concept. You know, at NFSN, we like to talk about farm to school in the 3 core areas. This is true for Native communities as well, although I will say that in Native communities, quite often farm to school branches beyond the 3 core areas and really comes to community food systems. So farm to school is a new term for really an ancient concept that just speaks about us and how we like to work with our youth and our elders and ensure that our education is place-based and is multi-generational. Next slide, please. Perfect. So to me, this really sums it up. What is that intersection of farm to school and food sovereignty? So farm to school really employs us to use the very same strategies that were used to colonize our people, such as controlling our food sources, removing us from our land, taking away our language and our ways of teaching. The great thing about farm to school is it actually allows us to use those very same tactics to regain our food sovereignty and regain our sense of community and place in a changing world. So I think farm to school is a tool for actual community transformation that has impacts that bleed far beyond the school boundaries. Next slide, please. And one more. Perfect. So At NFSN, we have been engaged for some time working with Native communities. I think 2014 was probably our first year that we really deliberately reached out on the ground to folks. And I'll talk about that work in a minute here. But right now we are working with a grantee cohort under a seed change model. And there's 6 community partners in that cohort. They're all focusing on different areas of farm to school. At this moment, none of them are specifically focused on ECE. However, some of the strategies are inherently multi-generational, and so they're incorporating the littlest ones to our high school students and community members. So I'm just going to share real briefly what some of the goals are of the partners we're currently working with. So Hardin School District, based out of Montana, they're really working on building a traditional food orchard. They're embracing the idea of indigenous foods through what are often called foraged foods, but they're looking to build that infrastructure on school grounds, which is really a wonderful model. It kind of addresses some of the challenges that we see in procurement, such as scale and food safety, and we'll talk about that later. But this model allows the school to essentially have a space where they can take children out to forage on school grounds in a way that's controlled, which is really lovely. They're also really focused on working with the community elders and integrating language and culture. Their strategy right now is a Harvest of the Month strategy. So they're developing recipes and tasting lessons utilizing ceremonial and traditional foods for each season. And what's really great is they're looking to actually build that into a curriculum that could be taught by the teachers and align with Common Core. So that's their work that they're working on right now. Next slide, please. Perfect. Let's see here. So the next group that we're working with is Indian Township School. They're based out of Maine. Their big focus is really just creating an outdoor learning area for students. They're working on building that school garden, getting raised beds in, getting school ownership over it, getting teachers engaged, and also looking to expand that into a medicine garden concept, bringing in, again, some of the more ceremonial foods of the community there. What's really great is they're looking at this as like a whole ecosystem. So they're working on bringing fish and fish product that's caught by students, using that as fertilizer, doing things that are very traditional in the relationship to the land there. The food that's grown in the garden is supplementing the summer food service and the school lunch program, and there's a goal to really have that integrated into the elderly food sites in the community as well. So again, looking at a broader definition than just farm to school for K through 12, but understanding that there's a multi-generational benefit. Next slide, please. Thanks. So Warm Springs, they're based out of Oregon, and Warm Springs is a confederated tribe. And so what that means is that there's more groups involved, more kind of cultures involved and represented in that community. It's not just one culture. So what's really great is they're approaching this as a way of looking at new innovations and technologies and how to integrate that into traditional production. So in other words, greenhouses, hoop houses, sort of more modern technologies for production, but things that can be done on the school grounds and yield higher volumes of production so that that can be used in the salad bar. This school is doing so many things in terms of integrating nutrition education. They have a district wellness policy that is a best practice for institutionalizing farm to school in all communities, but specifically in Native communities as well. And I'll talk about that in a minute. They're also really working on integrating their standards-based education, things like science and math, into lessons out in the greenhouse and garden. And they've had a lot of success in that. Their school community is all about really creating that environment of change and that environment of farm to school. Next slide, please. Thank you. So Heidelberg City Schools is based out of Alaska, and they're really working around two things. They started working on school gardens, so establishing small school garden beds that could withstand the climate and all of the things that Mother Nature has to throw at growing food up in Alaska on an island. So they started there, and now they had great success. The students were very engaged. Their next big goal is to actually integrate a fish to schools program. So looking at the significance of fish and other ocean and marine life and bringing that into the school meal environment, that would include things like how to process that in a way that's in alignment with traditional food processing and canning. A lot of really interesting things that I personally haven't seen very much dug into working with Native communities, and I think offers a good opportunity for all of us to learn on how specifically do you look at traditional foods and traditional food ways, aka processing, and integrate that into how your school cafeteria operates. So that's really exciting what they're doing. They're also working with the elders very specifically and deliberately into planting the garden and harvesting the garden with local and traditional foods. Next slide, please. Thank you. And Malama Kauai, they're based on Kauai and Hawaii, and I just had an opportunity to do a site visit with them. It was lovely. They're doing amazing transformational work, and I'm going to dig into them a little bit more because I think that they are really offering some lessons that we could all learn from, and they've had some really significant successes in their procurement work specifically. So Malama Kauai has been in the process of a 3-year pilot project to create programming for farm to school in their schools, as well as procurement, which has been a big focus given that 90% of the food going into their schools was imported. That is a huge challenge. So I think we all face this challenge, but here on the islands, it's even bigger. So, you know, farm to school is the natural strategy, and Malama Kauai as an organization saw that and seeks to promote school gardens and local farming. So again, they work in the school environments, but they're also working at a community level, integrating small-scale local farmers and educators from the community. So I just want to dig in a little bit as a case study. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So this is one of their sites, Kawakini, and they have a really amazing large-scale farm-to-school garden that you'll see in the center photo there. That garden is producing quite a bit of food. So that's kind of part one. The students are really out there in the garden working and engaging, and that food is used in community celebrations as well as the school meals. This particular school did not have an NSLP or a National School Lunch Program last year. They were able to start a National School Lunch Program at the school and still ensure that they were able to use local and locally grown produce, including produce from their school garden, and work with a local chef. So that's a really amazing thing that they not only scaled up to be able to use those federal funds, but were able to retain some of the great farm to school success that they had working outside of the National School Lunch Program. So this is a really great model for schools that don't yet have control over their school meal program and are maybe working solely on a catering concept, or charter schools where they're often bringing in their own food. This is a public charter school, so they do have a little bit more flexibility in terms of how they procure and who they procure from. Next slide, please. So this is some of the successes that they had last year. Again, going from no fully organized lunch program. They did have lunch at the school, but this is the first time that they've used federal funds. You'll see that they're procuring over 50% local food. That number is very significant for schools that have been going at it for a long time. So for them to achieve that in 1 year is really, really incredible. And as you see here, the way that they really did that is working with the community, working with volunteers. They had volunteers coming in at lunchtime to help monitor for things like plate waste, to help allow them to meet their goal of reducing waste on school grounds by using reusable trays and silverware so that they don't throw anything out. They're composting. It's a really full, holistic system that they've developed there. And as you can see, it has been successful. So that's, I feel like, a really great model because they are addressing the ideas of waste, of food waste, of procurement, all of these areas that we look to measure farm to school success. Next slide, please. Great. So this gives an idea of exactly how much food were they procuring locally. And you'll see that, roughly 51% of the food, total pounds of food was sourced from local farms and ranches. Again, that's so significant. And that equals out to over 62% of the money spent on food going to local farmers and ranchers, which is very significant. If we could all do that, I think we'd really be promoting local farming systems in our own communities. Sourcing locally for them is not only about increasing that quality of the school meal, but reducing the carbon footprint by not having to import foods in, which is often a challenge for Native communities. When you're isolated or in rural areas, that cost of import is really challenging, not only in the literal cost, but in the cost to our environment, and isn't in alignment with our way of life. So I think that this is a great case study to dig into in terms of how they were able to marry waste reduction along with increasing procurement. Next slide, please. One more. One more. Oh, it's not in here. So I'm almost out of time, but I just really wanted to go ahead and address a couple of questions that are probably going to come up around procurement. There are some challenges, as I alluded to, when you're working with procuring local and Indigenous foods. And the big ones that we've learned over our years working with Native communities has been around scale. So in a lot of Native communities, the scale of farmers is quite small. So how do you work with farmers farming on less than 5 acres that are sometimes doing it not as their primary job, and try to integrate them intentionally into your purchasing system, which has to be very tight. So that's a big challenge, and it comes with a host of detailed issues such as vendor qualifications, food safety, just simply getting enough produce to serve the large school districts. So that's one big bucket area. The other one is around menuing traditional foods and getting proper credit. And there has been a lot of work in this area and a lot of success. We've worked with USDA to update the food buying guide. So now it shows things like bison and blue corn. Hawaii was just successful in updating it to include breadfruit and taro, which were not formally in there. And so there's been a lot of progress there, but it is still a significant challenge. And in general, I would say the challenges around integrating locally grown food from Native communities comes with just how to increase local farming in those communities and ensure that what is being grown is appropriate for school market. And so that comes with production planning and relationship building. But I would say that the great opportunity that is afforded in Native communities as well as all communities through Farm to School is taking the relationship of food purchasing from being transactional to being relational. And to me, that's one of the huge assets working with Native communities.
Thank you so much, Elena. It's such great insight, and we really appreciate hearing about this work that's happening within Native communities. And kind of with that as our backdrop, we're going to move into talking a little bit more specifically about what's happening in early care and education settings. So next slide, please. Our next speakers are Claire Chase. Claire has been the Leech Lake Area SNAP Ed Coordinator for the past 2 years. Prior to that, she's always worked within the community of Leech Lake at the Leech Lake Tribal College and the Leech Lake Area Boys and Girls Club. Katie Costello is the Community Food Systems Program Associate at the Institute for Agricultural and Trade Policy in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She works with early care providers, teachers, small-scale farmers, and other community partners to increase the availability of healthy, local foods for young children. And Erin McKee is the Community Food Systems Program Director at IATP. Her current projects focus on farm to school and farm to early care and education, getting fresh, healthy produce from our local growers into schools and early care meals, as well as tasting and promoting curricula and educational models that encourage food literacy. So next slide, please, and I'll turn it over to Claire, Katie, and Erin.
Actually, oh no, I think it's skipping our slides.
Oh, sorry, folks. One moment. Let's see here. Anna, could you go 2 forward and see if those are embedded in there? Okay, let's see if I can go ahead and Sorry, folks, for the delay. I'm going to see if I can try to switch our view here.
We could probably give a little bit of background even without our slides while you're doing that, Lacey.
That'd be great, Erin. I'll see what we can set up here. You go ahead.
Okay. Why don't I just share about our model first, since that's not as beautiful of a slide as what Katie is going to show. So we work on farm to early care, and in our model we have 3 components. So we do local procurement, education about food and farming, and family engagement, and those are kind of the main things that we work with our partners on. So for local procurement, what that means is actually serving foods from local farms in their meals and snacks for the little kids. And ideally, we like to see that happen 2 times a week. And, you know, for an individual highlighted food, it's great for them to do that for 2 weeks at a time so that they're getting repeated exposures to those foods that we're trying to highlight and get them exposed to. And we like them also to do different preparations of those foods so that the kids have diverse experiences with the food. So it might be steamed or roasted or raw or stir-fried, etc. But they're getting lots of different tastes in case, you know, maybe they don't like it one way, but they like it a different way. And we also, you know, we work with our partners to think about highlighting the food rather than hiding it. So we're not trying to sneak some carrots into a baked good and the kids don't even know that they're eating carrots. We want them to really taste what carrots are about and eat, you know, roasted carrots that taste like sweet local carrots, and really hopefully influence them to like those foods. So then under education about food and farming, that can take the many different forms, obviously, but the cool thing about working with the early care age is that it's very hands-on and experiential learning. That's the norm for this age, and they can do classroom activities of all different kinds. So we actually created a farm to early care curriculum that has lots of different types of activities, since kids learn in lots of different types of ways. So there are science activities, reading, dramatic play, math, and then of course they can also do gardening, they can do taste tests or field trips. And we know that studies show that kids are more likely to try new foods if they've had this kind of interaction. So that's why we think the education component is very important. And then the 3rd component is family engagement. So we want to reinforce the classroom lessons that the kids are getting with what's happening at home. And this component is really flexible, so it meets the needs of the community. They can do family fun nights. They can invite the family to join them on field trips. They can make a family cookbook with recipes from all of the different families' traditions. They can just do social media posts to promote what they're doing and share that way, or they could also have little icons that indicate which foods are local on their menu. So different ways of letting the family know what's happening. So those are the 3 components of our program. And basically the program looks very different in different communities. And I think that that's a strength of this type of community food systems based program, where I love that Elena was talking about food sovereignty. It's very important to us that the community is the one that really has ownership of the program and control over how it looks. And being responsible to the culture of the communities that we're partnering with is an overarching theme and value that we have in all of these components. So for local procurement, it's realized in, you know, what foods are actually chosen to be highlighted and what recipes are used. Those can, of course, have cultural influences. For education, there's so much that you can do around culture and food. And with our current partners, they are talking a lot about including elders in leading foraging walks and having intergenerational learning about traditional food culture. And then in family engagement, there is, of course, a bunch you can do. We're working right now to think about integrating our program into a powwow that's coming up this fall. So it's very exciting to be doing this kind of work and incorporating culture into all of our components. And I'll pass it over to Katie to share a little bit more.
Thank you. Yeah, so if we could, I think we can just skip ahead 2 slides, please. We've already heard about our model. So this year we're so excited. the way that our organization works is we partner for 1 calendar year with a number of early care settings. And over the past couple of years, we've exclusively focused on partnering with Head Starts. So this year, all of our Head Start partners, there are 3 of them, we're working with all tribal partners in different areas of the state, as you can see here on this slide. And we're so excited about this opportunity because it really, it gives us a chance to, as Erin said, the primary goal of our program is to make the model work in different community contexts, whatever that might be. So urban versus rural. And in this case, we're excited to work with our partners on the ground to make sure that their values and the needs of their community are being met through our Farm to Head Start program. So we're working with the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, the Lower Sioux tribal community, and then our partners in Leech Lake, who we'll hear from in just a little bit. So actually, I think at this point, I'm going to pass it off to Claire, who is joining us, and I'll have her introduce herself and talk more about the work that they're doing in Leech Lake.
Morning, I'm Claire Chase, and as we talked about, I'm the SNAP Ed coordinator for the entire Leech Lake area. So this is really important to us because we haven't seen this Indigenous food or any kind of food movement on our reservation so far. So this is kind of like our initial push and our initial start. And what we've come to find is that it is aligned really nicely with our cultural growth in our program, which I think Elena kind of talked to, because I think there's that intergenerational breakage of knowledge. So what we're trying to do when we focus on our Indigenous foods is reconnect that. And the way that we worked the model of Farm to Early Care is that we actually engaged an Indigenous foods expert group to kind of move this through our organization. And what that group consisted of was our community members and our parents and our teachers and just people that were really knowledgeable about these things to help guide this and make sure that this was at the best place that we could be and to give back to the kids. And so with that, it's been really great working with Katie and Erin because their model is flexible, and I can definitely see it fitting into our group because we have picked foods very far off from what originally was in the curriculum. And we've been tailoring that curriculum to those foods to help our teachers and best service them in the classroom so that our kids are meeting that. And what's really nice is that in our organization, like I said, there hasn't been very much of this in our organization as well as on our reservation, but our organization is really starting to look at this cultural and this nutrition aspect, and they're really pushing for it in our program right now. We're actually have specific trainings in regards to culture in the classroom, and we're having trainings on nutrition in the classroom. And we've been doing this in the past year. I've been with SNAP Ed, like I said, for 2 years. So we've been doing very minor nutritional pieces, but now we're really pushing for that cultural piece, which is really exciting. As Elena said as well, that there are some challenges that we face. A lot of those have been, just initial pushback that any organization would get. And the way that we overcame those is that we actually met a lot with the floor staff, and we had lots of communication, and we wanted to keep them involved, and we wanted to make sure that they knew what they were getting into and that we took their input and we valued it so that they had that buy-in and they had that ownership. We did that with the teaching staff as well as with our kitchen staff. And then that was much easier to use to inform our managers that this was going to work, because that was one of their biggest fears, was that this was going to be too much on their plate. They weren't going to be able to handle it. We were understaffed. It wasn't going to work. So having that buy-in from those teachers and those cooks that were actually going to do it was the key to success. And I think that's, success, whether you're in a Native community or not, is getting that buy-in and showing that those staff are valued and heard, and showing them the benefits for not just themselves, but also for the children that we're serving. And then another thing is also the procurement and finding the local foods. We did struggle with that. We're currently getting ready to start this fall with getting our local foods into our menus. And the way that we kind of addressed this challenge was that we talked a lot with the companies that we source food from now, which are like Cisco and US Foods. And they've been really, really great with working with us and connecting us with like the meat specialty and the fruits and vegetables, produce specialty people in their company to help connect us with these local growers and make sure that we can get that food in, because like it was mentioned before, it's really hard to get that food shipped in at a reasonable price. And that was one of the challenges that we faced with our food manager. She was very concerned with that, and we were kind of looking at that and how to address that so that it's not such a big burden as that financial piece. We also were able to use our Indigenous food experts who are active in our community and go to these local growers already, and they were able to help supply us with lots of different farmers, lots of different places to go, and even different places to go foraging. And what's nice about that is that foraging piece actually has snowballed in our organization as well, and we have a separate initiative that goes back to like that outdoor connecting and doing the processing with our kids and inviting those community members in and teaching them how to do that. And then I think my long-term goals for this are just to make sure and evaluate our summer program and really see like any other challenges that have arisen that I haven't seen, and then to make sure that we can launch regular season with all the pieces ready to go, all our curriculum. Our teachers are actually giving a panel for our pre-service to discuss all the best practices within, and then just to consistently see this evolve over the years so that it becomes the best practice, and SNAP-Ed doesn't have to be so involved with making sure that this continues in our organization. And then we also want to definitely see our outdoor learning space that has hatched from this farm to early care, and making sure that we bring our families in and our communities and just really connecting that with our food and cultural programming. And I just think that this will really benefit our kids and our families and our wider community, because there has been such a disconnect with this culture and food, specifically in Leech Lake, and to see that kind of be revitalized.
Thank you so much, Claire, Katie, and Erin. And I apologize again for that little technical glitch, and appreciate that you just kept moving. A lot of great information there. I'm excited to turn it over to our next group. And again, as you have questions for all of our panelists, please continue to type those into the question box, and we'll address those at the end of the session. We've got another great presentation here. Our next speakers are Julia Sargent, who has extensive experience coordinating health nutrition services in 4 rural remote Head Start locations in Alaska, procuring 12 tons of mulch from New Jersey to Alaska, teaching children about starfruit, looking at the shape of seal teeth, and tracking lots of data are day-to-day activities for Julia. Tracy Stewart holds a Master's of Science degree in Clinical Psychology from University of Alaska Anchorage, and is currently enrolled at UAA pursuing her PhD in Clinical Community Psychology. Her area of clinical research interest is focused in rural and Indigenous populations. And finally, Sue-Ann Unger, who has an MS in Environmental Studies and a BS in Education Biology. She's worked for Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association since 2001. At APIA, she's facilitated several projects relating to traditional foods in the Aleutian and Pribilof regions, including research studies, cooking demonstrations, and the development of resources for the region. So with that, I'll turn it over to you all.
Hi, thank you. This is Julia. Thanks so much for having us today, and I'm really enjoying hearing all of the stories and projects. And I just think back to being little, and even now, just like the joy you get when you're about to eat your most favorite food, and like the richness there is in sitting at the table with others. And so I know with all of these regulations that all of Farm to School Network has, sometimes they seem like they're environmentally unjust, but I think our hope today in sharing what we've worked on is to show that there is some weaving of all of those federal regulations and resources, and then really how to serve traditional foods. So we have worked on Kakamiuch, the Head Start Traditional Foods Curriculum, and Kakamiuch is the Unangam Tanu word for the Unangans, the Aleut, and it means to hunt or fish for food and collect plants. So essentially, it's subsistence. Our project really had its roots in a text that was authored by Sue Unger, Kakamiuch. It's available on Amazon, and they're going to send out the links afterwards. It was developed through a Centers for Disease Control Native Diabetes grant from 2008 to 2014. So as we start, we're going to give you kind of a lay of our region and then go into the text that preceded the curriculum. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association, where we work, provides services to 13 tribes, and we oversee clinic services in 4 communities and currently have 3 Head Start programs. Like most of you, we're really rural. We're also rural remote, so that means you can only access the islands by air or boat. And for example, going to Unalaska, where one of our Head Start locations is, it's about a 2.5-hour flight and maybe $2,000. So very expensive. The region is characterized by harsh weather, volcanoes, earthquakes, really, really high winds, where we maybe have a few alders in one location, but very few trees. And another character of our region is we have 2 dialects in Unangam Tanu. There's an Eastern dialect and an Atkin dialect. So as we were developing the curriculum, we really tried to pick language in the Eastern and the Western dialects that would be similar enough so that our kids in Head Start throughout the region would have a shared language. Our traditional foods in the communities are mostly related to the ocean. We have marine mammals, fish, tidal foods, and then plants, birds, caribou, reindeer, deer, and then some domesticated animals such as buffalo and cows. So we can go next slide. Sue, are you there? Sorry, I'm not able to hear you, Sue. Sue is going to have these slides, but I'll just take on until she can come on. She's calling in remotely. This is a picture of the text, Kakamiu, and that Sue authored, and it really took her 6 years of groundwork to have this resource come together. The idea was just really developing something sustainable. And so it kind of has become like the cultural textbook for our region and how to procure, harvest traditional foods. And it was a resource dedicated to reducing negative health consequences of diabetes. We can go next slide. Through the book and even before the book, everyone was really instrumental in culture camps and hosting elder potlucks, health fairs, cooking and butchering. We had regional cooking demonstrations throughout 6 years for the grant as we were collecting information, researching nutrition aspects of the most unique foods in the entire world, and really working with community groups, elders, youth, and staff to support these programs. The first picture you'll see is the culture camps. And so you can see there's a lot of community involvement, and that's always a cool thing. I know everyone on the call does that, right? You get your youth together, you get the elders together, families together, those local agencies, and it's just really beautiful when that all combines together. We can go to the next slide. So these are our significant contributors to the CACFP text. We really learned a lot from them. Sue did a lot of work. We were fortunate she found recordings that had taken place with elders and significant contributors to the book. Historically, there was a lot of loss of knowledge through World War II, and when there was an evacuation of Unangan individuals into Southeast Alaska, and of course, like many others, forced boarding schools, loss of language. So there was a lot of knowledge that was lost, and Sue really did an awesome job working with these significant contributors to really try to capture that knowledge. Next slide. Okay, so here's another picture. This is just showing the historical photos with current hunting and procuring practices. And so we wanted to make sure as we were really taking account of ways to process and harvest foods that we were showing traditional methods, but also more current methods. Okay, next slide. And this slide shows the different preparation techniques that one might use, like baking, boiling, frying, drying, fermentation, rendering fat. And then a lot of preservation techniques are featured in the text as well, such as salting, drying, freezing, fermenting, burning, such as like burying eggs in the ocean, storing food in sea lion stomachs. And so there was a lot of research done on how to make sure that those foods were safe and also followed like DEC, state guidelines, federal regulations. Okay, next slide. So these are the nutrition facts labels for most of the foods in the book. We had to research data sources outside of the US. We looked at Canada for like chocolate lily bulbs. We looked at Japan for sculpin fish. So we really tried to develop a comprehensive nutritional infographics and nutrition labels to showcase the foods that are in the region. And so a couple of these slides just show, for example, I'll just highlight the wild duck. It's showing the difference in iron. So you can, how much, 3 ounces of wild duck, how much iron there is compared to 3 ounces of like a domestic chicken there. And so we didn't intend for the traditional food to win, but it won every single time we did a nutrient comparison. So that was exciting to us. Okay, next slide. Tracy is going to take over. This is a picture of the CACFP Head Start Traditional Foods preschool curriculum.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. Just making sure. So, yeah, and as Julia had kind of introduced our organization and our region, as well as our original CACFP text. And so from there, as the momentum was building with CACFP and bringing and revitalizing our traditional knowledge and food sovereignty in the region, our organization really wanted to keep that and just continue to develop different ways that we can integrate traditional foods and traditional knowledge into our communities. And so something to the table for us was really looking at our youth, looking at wellness through prevention, and through the knowledge of traditional foods and nutrition. And so our Head Start program mandates that we have at least one nutrition curriculum per month. And so APIA wanted to really look at that and try to create a culturally responsive and a culturally congruent curriculum that we could integrate with our Head Start programs. And something that affected the region that our youth were in. So for example, previously in the Head Start programs, our youth have been learning about, for example, I'll throw out like, which is great, but also something that's not locally foraged and found. And not only that, as Julia mentioned, in our very remote region, it's something that's even just hard to get out there. So we wanted to create a curriculum that made more sense for us in the region. So in combination with that, we also came across some Nota Begay funding
at that time, and that funding was to support prevention of illness and disease that are very prominent within the Native American communities, such as obesity and diabetes. So again, looking at prevention through nutrition, with our main goal of being, again, as we have on our slide, just improving health and wellness for our preschool age kids through consumption of traditional foods. And Sue and Julia were authors on that, as well as myself. I got really, Julia and Sue did a lot of the groundwork with this. I came in as a practicum student doing my community practicum, helping them out with this. And so a privilege and treat to get to jump in on this project and help out. We also collaborated with cultural and mentors, and one of our primary elders that worked on this with us was Moses Dirks, who's also from the region. And then we also worked with, you'll see here that we credit Sharon Kay for her artwork that you'll see throughout our curriculum. And she is one of our well-known artists and elders from the region. And so Sharon and Moses came together with really help inform a lot of the traditional knowledge that we put into this. I think we can go to the next slide now. Thank you. So this just kind of gives you an overview of the curriculum structure. And so what we did was we really to mirror the curriculum based off of the Milos textbook that Sue was so instrumental in developing before that. And so this really just mirrors, so we have our introduction, but then we go through the main foods that are found in our region that are procured and harvested in our region, and that's marine mammals, fish, birds, caribou, reindeer, plants, and tidal foods. And so what you'll see here too, if you can see on the slide, is that each unit has an introduction page, and that page shows harvesting and procuring of each of these different units. And so that's something that we really wanted to as well, was not just the recipes and the nutritional facts, but really bringing it back to, kind of what we're doing here, farm to school, actually doing harvest to school, like from the very beginning, and teaching our kids how to go out and harvest and procure. And so those illustrations reflect that there. And so we also worked really closely with Moses and Sharon, again, our elders, and what we wanted these illustrations to look like. And so there's what we decided on was looking at what it looks like kind of modern day and procure these foods and plants and animals. Next slide, please. So what I'll walk through on the next 3 slides is just going to be the break of what each unit would look like. And they're very robust, and I think that's one of the things that I really love about the curriculum. Each unit is just really jam-packed with lots of activities, and we wanted to create a curriculum that was really easy for our Head Start our Head Start teachers. As Julia had mentioned, out in our region, there's a lot of barriers, there's a lot of hardships, and our Head Start teachers wear many hats. And so we wanted to create a curriculum that they could just pick up, and it could make their life easy in terms of integrating this nutrition curriculum. And something else that was a big goal with our curriculum was, as I had mentioned, with Head Start mandating one curriculum, nutrition curriculum per month, we really wanted to create something that could integrate it into other lessons and be into the classroom more than once a month, something that they could do multiple times throughout the month and throughout the school year. And so as you'll see here, again, I mentioned each unit starts with an illustration of a harvest picture. The second image that you'll see on this slide is that the unit starts with introduction into our language of Unangam Tenu, which is the traditional language of the Unanga or Aleut. And so again, like I said, with APIA wanting this to be very responsive, we wanted to make sure that we did our best to really create as much as the culture as we could as well. And so each unit starts with Unangam Tenu, just words that we thought the youth could start picking up. And each Head Start program not only got the curriculum, but they also had an card reader. And so essentially what this is that you can swipe, and the reader will read Unangam Tenu word. And so ideally a lot of our Head Start teachers know a bit of Unangam Tenu, but this could be helpful in the classrooms as well with integrating the language. And then what you'll see is the third image here on this slide is a bigger picture of that first image, which is this. And what we did was we created large-scale harvest posters that we used in conjunction with the curriculum. Thought would be a great idea for teachers to have as kind of an opening opportunity for each unit. So the teachers could sit around during circle time, during story time, and hold up these harvest posters and start to talk about marine mammals, start to talk about harvesting traditional foods and food sovereignty, and starting to get the class talking about these things. Next slide, please. And so this, again, this slide continues to go on to each section within each unit. And the harvest posters, one of the big things in it, this nutrition curriculum. And so this was where kind of like the meat and potatoes, if you will, of the unit is. And that's where the real nutrition lesson comes in. And we did that through creating a recipe that could be utilized and made in the classroom with the teachers and the students hands-on, using and integrating our traditional foods that are found locally. So for example, you'll see with this one, the been using is with seal and marine mammals. And so this is using a seal lion meatball recipe. And so it's just a step-by-step that teachers can use, and facilitating question and answers, integrating, Unangam Tinu language that had been previously learned. And then you'll see here, the second image on this slide is the nutritional information. And the way that we really wanted to present this curriculum was where we could present the information to the teachers so that they're learning as well as they're going through this curriculum, but we presented it in a way that was already adjusted to kind of break down some of this nutritional information to a Head Start level. And that took a lot of collaboration with our elders, with our team, with other Head Start teachers in the region, to just really figure out a way, how can we make this tangible for 3 to 5 year olds where they're actually able to really retain a lot of this nutritional information. And so that was a big project and a big piece of our curriculum as well. And then the last image that you'll see on this slide is activity extensions. And so this is where I was talking about, where we didn't want it to just be this one nutritional lesson that they had once a month. We really wanted to give other opportunities, ideas of ways that this traditional knowledge and traditional foods can continue to be brought in the classroom on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, just multiple times, so that, you know, as we know, repetition helps with learning that knowledge. And so there's several different activities and ways that this can be integrated into the classroom. Another side project that we did with the activity extensions was the creation of digital stories that went along with the lessons. And this was a really fun project to work with too, because this one really, we worked to do an intergenerational project with this. And so Moses Dirks, our elder, proficient in Unangam Tinu, worked with one of our youth who's a budding Unangam Tinu speaker. And so she helped narrate these digital stories. And so watching her and Moses work together was a really beautiful process. And so we have several digital stories that teachers can go and access as activity extensions and can show in their classrooms as well. Next slide, please.
Hi everyone, Tracy, sorry to interrupt. I just want to acknowledge that we are coming up to the top of the hour. We may run over just about 5 minutes due to some of those technology delays. If you're not able to stay with us, again, this is being recorded and you can take a look at those last few minutes on the recording. But we really want to get to this excellent content that Tracy is sharing with us towards the end. So if you're not able to stay with us, thank you for being here. And again, that recording will be available. Tracy, we look forward to your last slides here.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, we are almost done too. I appreciate you. And so just on this last slide, just wrapping up our unit, more activities that we wanted to integrate, artwork by Sharon Kay, just more activities that kids can use. This one that I really want to highlight on here is the image that you see in the center. And this is a newsletter that goes out with each unit. This is where we wanted to integrate the family and the community with as well. And so a nutrition lesson and a letter goes to family members. as well as another traditional recipe. And this is where we also put in a request for donations. And Julia will talk a little bit more about food and safety and some of the barriers and ways that we address some of those barriers with getting donations and locally harvested. And then that last image there is just another opportunity and way that we tried to integrate our culture. The song that talks about the harvesting of seal, and that was something that the kiddos can sing in the classroom that kind of just brings it all together. Next slide, please.
Right, thanks. This is Julia. Just a quick slide to show regulations that we're following. And as Tracy mentioned, within the curriculum, we did a Head Start donated foods inventory and a donated foods quick check. So this was an easy way for staff to know, is the food safe? Is it the right temperature? What kinds of things do I want to look for before I would actually accept this food into the Head Start classroom? And then for those in Head Start, how could I actually count this as an in-kind donation? So next slide. I'll be really quick. Just a quick note. We did do a formative and process evaluation. We wanted to make sure the curriculum met the teachers' needs, that it was easy, that we had integrated any ideas and concepts that they had. And we wanted to know that this tool actually worked. Like all evaluations, did it increase consumption of traditional foods by 25%? Was it integrated into the monthly nutrition lesson? Did we increase traditional food intake? Did children know if a food was healthy or traditional, or was it both? So we did have positive results on that. And because of those results, we can go to the next slide. We were able to make policy changes for our Head Start program. So that included expanding our donated foods within federal state guidelines, and then adopting the curriculum into our Head Start program, and also having our Health Services Advisory Committee approve the curriculum and put it in there as one of our tools we could use during nutrition lessons or parent activities. Thank you so much for having us. Thanks for listening. Karasaku.
Thank you so much. Great to see. It's such a beautiful curriculum. And again, we'll send all those links out to be able to access that curriculum. It is all available online, which is just fantastic, in the follow-up email. I do want to take just 3 minutes to respond to a few questions. First question for Julia and Tracy. Could you talk a little bit more very briefly about how those traditional foods are aligning with the CACFP meal patterns in the Head Starts that you're working with?
Sure. So we actually did use one of the USDA CACFP resources for Alaska for some of the recipes, and then we reconfigured any of the recipes to meet the CACFP serving sizes. And so, for example, like the berry smoothie, we put in, this is how much you would need of a fresh berry, this is how much you would need of a frozen berry to really meet like this requirement for snack during this meal pattern. So we went through in the curriculum, there's the recipe for the classroom, and it's like a production record. It's made to allow the staff to calculate how much to buy, how much to prepare. And then within that, there's a script for the teacher or the cook staff to use while they prepare the recipe for the kids. So for example, if you're going to prepare this meal, have 3 to 4 tables out, have about this many kids at each table, and then this would be the role of each child to really make this a cooperative learning environment and to make the recipe. So not only do they get to taste it, touch it, smell it, see it, they're completely involved in making it for the class.
Great. Thanks, Julia. I have a question for Claire and the IATP team. How do you engage parents, or do you have any kind of top tips for engaging parents specifically around like cooking classes and those integrative opportunities?
So this is Claire, and We have definitely struggled getting the parents involved. We do a lot with the family engagement coordinators to ensure that we do get parent involvement in the Head Start. And we are actually planning a big event where we are partnering with another organization through a grant opportunity, hopefully, in Little Falls, Minnesota. And they're called Sprout, and they have an art grant that we're going to be putting in to kind of do a big family engagement event that will highlight these foods that we've talked about in the farm to early care model. And we'll have like art vendors, and then we'll also have a culinary art class to kind of pitch to them to see if that's something that they're interested in for the rest of the school year. And that's something that we can, you know, work on developing with them. We also do like newsletters that we send home and recipes that we do, and we do a lot of like really hands-on getting to know kids and the parents. And what's nice is that I've been from the community so much, or for so long, that I know a lot of these parents, so it's really easy for me to engage them and their children. But I think that, you know, it's different, and you have to really have that buy-in even for those parents and just have those personal conversations with them, like I talked about with having the teaching staff and the kitchen staff on board.
Lacey, I think we can't hear you.
I apologize, guys.
No, that's okay.
Thank you. One last question. Sorry for that dead space. Elena, this question's for you. Do you have recommendations for resources for folks to learn about Indigenous foods in their region?
Hi. You know, there is not like a database or anything like that that I know of. I would say that if you go to the First Nations Institute, they do have a list of grantees that they've granted to do work in Native communities over the past few years. Those would be great contacts on the ground. In general, my approach is to go ahead and reach out directly to the practitioners doing the work. So they have a great list. We also, you know, I would be happy to help connect you to any of our communities if you happen to be in one of those regions. There is also an organization that is looking at this type of work, and they do not have a website. They will be presenting at the Seeds of Native Health Conference, and I can send follow-up to Lacey so that she can send this out. But sort of the long and short of it is that there's not a one-stop location. I would recommend reaching out to your local communities if you need help trying to identify any farm to school stars in those areas. The First Nations Institute is a great place, or us, I would say. Otherwise, you can look at the food buying guide through USDA if you are procuring for your school food, and you can look at, they actually have traditional foods in there, and you can work with your USDA rep if you have any questions around that.
Great recommendations. Thank you, Elena. And we'll follow up with a lot of those resources in that follow-up email. Thanks to all of our panelists for this great information. Thanks to all of you for joining us and being patient with some of our technical issues, and with such a lot of valuable content, and hope you enjoyed as much as we did. Again, keep an eye out for that recording and all the great resources we have to follow up, and hope that you'll join us for future webinars. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks.
Thank you.